A missing name in a will, a hidden camera, and a betrayal caught on tape. 3 sentences. That's all it took to shatter the silence that had blanketed the room for nearly 10 minutes. Elijah Moore stood still, back straight, eyes locked on the glossy oak table where the will lay. Above him, the ceiling fan turned slowly, as if dragging out the heavy tension in the room. He wore a plain white shirt and worn slacks, but in that moment, he was the only one not bowing his head. Across the table sat Connor and Jocelyn Whitmore, the biological children of Evelyn Whitmore, leaning back comfortably in high-end leather chairs, wearing expressions like they already knew how this story would end. Grant Holloway, the family attorney, silver hair neatly combed, spoke in a steady, practiced tone. Mrs. Evelyn updated her will about 3 weeks before she passed, and according to this final version, the estate will be divided equally between Connor and Jocelyn. No mention of Elijah Moore, not a single line, not a single word. No one in the room said anything, but Jocelyn's eyes spoke volumes, pity laced with triumph. Connor didn't bother hiding his smirk, his fingers tracing the edge of the will like it was a prize he'd already claimed. But Elijah, he didn't cry, he didn't shout. He simply tightened his fist beneath the table. Charleston, South Carolina. A city draped in old brick rooftops and centuries of family legacy. The Whitmores were one of the city's most recognized names. Millions in assets, real estate, stock portfolios, and a grand historic estate right in the heart of town. And Elijah Moore, the boy who once served as a house helper under that very roof, the boy Evelyn took in, raised, and trusted, today, he was no longer part of their story. Or so they thought. Because there was one thing that Grant Holloway, Connor, and Jocelyn didn't know. A few weeks before Evelyn passed, she had whispered to Elijah in the study, "Could you help me install a tiny camera? Right here. I just want some peace of mind." Elijah didn't ask why. He simply nodded and did it. And now, as the will sat on the table, erasing him completely, he knew one thing for certain. The truth wasn't on that paper. It was in a hard drive, and it was about to be played. When Elijah Moore turned 10, his entire world fell silent. His mother, Delilah Moore, a quiet housekeeper in the Whitmore household, died suddenly from a stroke while cleaning the second-story windows. No relatives, no will. Just an old cloth bag, a few sets of children's clothes, and Elijah, a boy with eyes far older than his age, and a sadness no child should ever carry. Everyone assumed Mrs. Evelyn would call social services, but she didn't. No grand announcements, no promises made. She simply walked into the laundry room, where Elijah sat curled up, and said, "You can stay, if you want. There's a small room by the kitchen. It's not much, but it's yours." Elijah nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't dare believe it fully. But in Evelyn's eyes that day, there was something that felt like home. From that day on, Elijah lived in the Whitmore estate, not as an officially adopted son, but more like a quiet, tireless shadow, mopping floors, hanging laundry, running errands, always polite, always keeping his head down, drifting through grand rooms with footsteps light as breath. But every night, Mrs. Evelyn would leave a warm plate of cookies and a cup of milk by his door. She taught him to read, using worn books from the old library. She taught him how to budget, how to tend a garden, how to fix a leaking faucet. No one declared anything. But love doesn't need paperwork. Still, that love didn't come from every corner. Connor and Jocelyn, Evelyn's biological children, never once looked at Elijah as part of the family. The orphan houseboy. Eating off our table. Not our brother. Don't get it twisted. Elijah heard it all, remembered every word. but he never responded. He learned how to bow his head without breaking, how to endure without forgetting who gave him a place to stand. And all those years, it was Evelyn who kept him anchored in the belief that he mattered, that being a housekeeper's son wasn't a fate, it was a beginning, that even without blood ties, you're the one I chose to keep. That's how Elijah lived, quiet, loyal, steady, and now, all of it was being erased with the stroke of a pen. But Elijah knew, the past can't be erased if you hold the proof. You don't need to worry about the future, Elijah. I've taken care of everything. Mrs. Evelyn didn't say that just once. Sometimes it was in the garden, while they trimmed the lavender bushes. Sometimes in the kitchen, with Elijah at the sink and her sipping her afternoon tea. Sometimes it was a soft whisper, barely louder than the wind. Other times, she would place a gentle hand on his shoulder, look him square in the eyes, and say it again. You're a good person, Elijah. And good people asked what deserved to taken care of meant. He didn't need a house, didn't need money. He just needed to know. He wasn't invisible. But then Mrs. Evelyn got sick, and all the invisible things, they started showing up, clearly. Connor and Jocelyn could no longer hide their impatience. It wasn't about their mother's condition. It was about the estate. They started arguing over the Riverside villa, the stock portfolio, who would take over the family business. No one asked what Evelyn wanted. No one asked where it hurt. Elijah did. He cooked her favorite porridge from an old recipe, low on salt, with a touch of fresh basil. He woke up early to check her temperature, measured out her meds on time, and every night he sat by her bed until she drifted off before quietly leaving. The room smelled softly of lavender. On her nightstand, a warm cup of tea, prepared by Elijah. Beside it, her half-written journal. Inside, one line stood out, written in shaky slanted letters but unmistakably clear. Elijah belongs. He always did. And where was Connor? Busy counting assets. Jocelyn, buried in her phone, already calling interior designers to redo Mom's room after she's gone. They didn't know Elijah saw it all, and Elijah didn't need them to know. But there was one thing that quietly stung. Every kind gesture, every sleepless night, tending to the only woman who had ever called him son, now being crushed beneath a few cold, heartless signatures. Mrs. Evelyn grew weaker with each passing day, but her smile still bloomed every time she saw Elijah. And one night, as the dim light in the study flickered off, she gently took his hand. Elijah, could you help me with something small? Could you install a camera in the study, just to help me feel a little safer? That's all. Elijah didn't ask why. He just nodded, like he always did. Because if Mrs. Evelyn sensed something wasn't right, then something was definitely being hidden. Evelyn Whitmore passed away on a quiet March morning. Sunlight spilled across the old tiled floor by the window. Inside the room, Elijah sat beside her bed, holding her hand until her very last breath. She didn't speak a single word in the end, just a faint smile, light as air, and a look at Elijah, not filled with fear or regret, but with trust. Word of her passing spread swiftly through Charleston's financial circles, where the name Whitmore had long stood for wealth, influence, and legacy. 3 days later, inside a stately building in the heart of downtown, the will was set to be read. The conference room fell silent, broken only by the crisp sound of pages turning in the hands of attorney Grant Holloway, the man entrusted with Evelyn's final will. Elijah sat in the very back row, quietly. The fitted black suit he wore was the only piece of clothing he had ever bought new, because Mrs. Evelyn once told him, A person with self-respect will always know how to stand tall. At the velvet-draped table, Holloway set the file down and began to read. I, Evelyn Whitmore, being of sound mind, declare this to be my final will. Connor straightened in his seat, a faint smirk forming on his lips. Jocelyn glanced at Elijah with bland disinterest, as if he were an accidental guest at the wrong meeting. Each clause was read out loud and clear. The Folly Beach property, bequeathed to Jocelyn. 60% of Whitmore Industries stock, passed to Connor. Investment accounts, Charleston real estate, the art collection, all divided between her two biological children. Not a single mention of Elijah. Not a word. Not a thank you. Not even a houseboy. The room grew heavier. Connor crossed his legs, unable or unwilling to hide his smug satisfaction. Jocelyn pulled out her phone and began texting. Elijah simply sat still, hands resting in his lap, eyes drawn to the window pane, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the table. But in his mind, a memory played on repeat. 2 weeks before Mrs. Evelyn's death. The study had been quiet, just the soft glow of a desk lamp and her fragile voice. Elijah, could you help me install a small camera? Over there by the bookshelf. I'm not sure, but I'd feel a little safer if it were there. Elijah had nodded. He installed the camera, set the password, and then forgot about it until this very moment. Because if Evelyn Whitmore had felt uneasy enough to ask for a sense of safety, then maybe, just maybe, the will being read today wasn't the one she had written. The old attic room in the Whitmore estate still carried the scent of pine wood and aging paint. Elijah sat at the desk. In front of him, a faded silver Toshiba laptop, the same one that had seen him through years of late-night studying, long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. The screen booted up slowly, the cooling fan letting out a low hum. But Elijah wasn't anxious. He opened a folder labeled EW Private Cam, typed in the password, Safekeeping 27. 3 video files appeared, a soft ping, each marked with clear date and timestamps. He clicked on the first one. The hidden camera feed came into view, gradually. The frame pointed toward Mrs. Evelyn's ebony wood desk. The lighting was soft. Her voice, though frail, still carried its quiet strength, like she was speaking directly to whoever was watching. Today is February 14th. I, Evelyn Whitmore, in a sound state of mind, wish to clearly confirm my final wishes. I leave my entire estate, real estate, company shares, bank accounts, and all other assets, to be divided equally among 3 people: Connor Whitmore, Jocelyn Whitmore, and Elijah Moore. Elijah isn't my blood, but he's the only one who stood by me when I had no one else. If any will appears after today that does not include Elijah, know that it does not reflect my true intent. Evelyn then held up a slim blue folder to the camera. The label printed clearly. Final Will, February 14th, witnessed at Whitmore residence. The screen faded to black. Elijah didn't move. His throat tightened, not from emotion, but from the surge of anger rising in his chest. He opened the second video. Timestamp, 2 a.m., February 24th. Dim lighting. The sound of a door creaking open. A familiar figure stepped into frame. Grant Holloway. The attorney moved toward the desk, slipped on a pair of fabric gloves, opened a drawer, and carefully pulled out the old will. Then, from a leather briefcase, he produced a thicker file. He slid it into place. Quiet, methodical. Just then, another figure appeared at the doorway. Connor. He didn't enter the room, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed. He said nothing. He did nothing. He simply watched. Elijah paused the video and zoomed in on the frames. There was no doubt now. This was betrayal. This was conspiracy. He pulled a USB drive from the drawer and backed up both videos. Then he stood, quietly, but with eyes no longer filled with silence, no longer the houseboy standing behind the curtains. Now, he was the one holding the key to expose the truth. The next morning, no one at the Holloway and Associates office paid much attention to the young man in a white button-up shirt, carrying a simple canvas bag as he walked through the glass doors. They didn't know. He had once mopped these very hallways, once served tea to the same conference room at the end of that corridor. Elijah Moore hadn't come with rage. He came with preparation. He knocked on the door to Attorney Grant Holloway's office, and without waiting for a response, he walked in. Holloway looked up from a stack of case files, visibly caught off guard at the sight of Elijah. "Elijah, what do you need?" Elijah didn't sit. He stepped forward, calm and deliberate, and placed a small black USB stick gently onto the glass desk. "What's this?" Holloway asked, his tone instinctively tightening. Elijah answered, voice steady, each word landing like a quiet strike. "The truth. And I think you should watch it before it reaches the court, the Bar Association, and every local newsroom. No threats, just a statement." But the temperature in the room dropped instantly. Holloway stared at the USB. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. What are you talking about?" Elijah's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Evelyn asked me to install a hidden camera so she could feel safe." Holloway's hand froze. His eyes darted. He was beginning to understand. But Elijah wasn't finished. "The first video shows her, clearly stating who the heirs are. 3 people, not 2. The second video is you, wearing gloves, removing the original, replacing it with another." Holloway turned pale. The seasoned attorney who once thought he was untouchable now sat frozen, statue-like, behind his desk. The houseboy he had likely never looked at twice now stood in front of him as an equal. No, as his reckoning. And Holloway knew there was no way out. "You have 24 hours, Elijah said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm. "To do what's right, or I'll let justice do it for you." Elijah turned. No need for more words. He opened the door and walked out, leaving behind a crumbling Grant Holloway in stunned silence. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten, because when the truth has evidence, it doesn't need to scream. It only needs to be revealed. The conference room at Holloway Law that day was unusually full, not because the media had caught wind of anything. No one had reported it yet. But because the people who once believed they held the entire story were about to face a truth they never saw coming. Connor sat with arms crossed, chin lifted, like the whole room belonged to him. Jocelyn didn't bother making eye contact, tapping on her phone, smirking when she saw Elijah walk in. "The houseboy's here too," she muttered, just loud enough for the person across from her to hear. Elijah didn't respond. He simply walked to the front of the room, calmly plugged a small USB drive into the media hub, connected to the large screen. Then he turned around, back straight, eyes locked on attorney Grant Holloway, whose face had gone pale. The screen lit up. First video. Evelyn Whitmore, seated in her study, looking directly into the camera. "I leave my estate to be equally divided among 3 children, Connor, Jocelyn, and Elijah Moore. Not out of pity, but because he is my family. The one who didn't leave me when I was at my weakest." Connor shot up from his chair. "This is fake. She never said that." But the next video made that claim crumble. Grant Holloway appeared on screen, quietly opening a drawer, pulling out the original will, and replacing it with a thicker, altered file. And behind him, Connor, standing at the doorway, watching it happen, without stopping it. As the video froze on that moment, Connor lowered his head. The entire room fell into a thick, stunned silence, like a trapdoor had opened beneath everything they thought they knew, every role they thought they'd secured. Elijah turned to face them, calm, no shouting. "I didn't come here for the money. I came for the truth you all tried to bury with her." A knock at the door. 2 police officers stepped inside. "Mr. Grant Holloway." He stood, trembling. I can explain." "You can do that at the station," one of them replied, snapping cuffs onto the man who once ruled this office like a king. The judge stepped forward, voice resolute. "The last will presented by Attorney Grant Holloway is hereby declared invalid. Based on video evidence, the original document will be reinstated. The rightful heirs are Connor Whitmore, Jocelyn Whitmore, and Elijah Moore." No applause, no cheers, only silence, the kind of silence justice brings. Elijah Moore never returned to the Whitmore estate, not once. The house where he grew up, where he scrubbed floors by hand, where he once waited silently for a single word of acknowledgement. Now it was nothing more than a shell of what used to be. The things that truly mattered, he carried with him. Months after the court ruling, in a low-income neighborhood on the north side of Charleston, a place where few people talked about wills or inheritance, Elijah opened a small office, no bigger than the corner grocery down the block. White-painted walls, an old wooden desk, 2 folding chairs, and a sign hanging in the sun-faded window. Whitmore Legacy Center, protecting the rights of those the world tried to forget. Not a law firm, not a business for profit, but a space to restore the voices of people who had once been treated like they didn't exist. Elijah worked quietly, helping an elderly woman reclaim land taken by her own family, helping a young man uncover the truth after a will had been manipulated, helping kids like he once was, kids with no one in their corner, understand. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to be believed. They deserve to be protected. One late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the window, stretching across the worn tile floor. Elijah was sorting through some paperwork when he heard a child's voice just outside the door. "Dad, what does legacy mean?" The father, groceries in hand, leaned down and answered, "It means someone fought to make sure the truth was never forgotten." Elijah looked up, didn't say a word, just smiled, softly, peacefully. He didn't need family titles. He didn't need a last name on a plaque. He didn't need anyone to call him one of their own. He just needed to be seen, to be acknowledged, to not be erased from the story. Legacy isn't about a mansion or shares or a bank balance. Legacy is about what you leave behind for someone else, not in money, but in truth. And Elijah had done that, not for revenge, but so that no one else would be forgotten, the way he once was.